She stood at attention while he barked orders, his voice dripping with contempt. "Clean my boots, Private. And make them shine." Isabel Miller didn't flinch. She'd spent 3 months being invisible, enduring the dismissals, the sneers, the casual cruelty of soldiers who saw her as nothing more than a liability. They treated her like she didn't belong, like she was only there because of some diversity quota. What none of them knew, what she'd kept hidden behind her silence in her perfectly pressed uniform, was that the base commander whose portrait hung in every building, whose word was law on this installation, went home to the same last name she did. And tonight, that secret was about to change everything. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this, don't miss out, subscribe now for more. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Hastings as Isabel Miller completed her 50th push-up. Her arms trembled, sweat dripping onto the dusty ground beneath her, but she didn't stop. Around her, the other recruits from basic training had long since finished their morning physical training and headed to the mess hall. But Isabel was still here, still proving herself, still trying to earn respect that seemed perpetually out of reach. 60, she counted aloud, her voice steady despite the burning in her shoulders. 61. 62. She'd been at Fort Hastings for 3 months now, assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division after completing basic training at Fort Benning. At 22 years old, she was one of the youngest soldiers in her unit and, more significantly, one of only 4 women. The European accent she'd inherited from her mother, who'd emigrated from Prague 15 years ago, made her stand out even more. In a world where fitting in meant survival, Isabel was a collection of differences that marked her as an outsider. 75, she grunted, pushing through the pain. Her company commander, Captain Brennan, had made it clear during her first week that he expected her to fail. Not in words, exactly, but in the way he assigned her to the least important duties, the way he overlooked her during briefings, the way his eyes seemed to look right through her when she spoke. Isabel finished her 100th push-up and collapsed onto the ground, her chest heaving. She allowed herself 10 seconds of rest, counting them off in her head, before pushing herself to her feet. The other soldiers might be eating breakfast, but she had a different routine. Every morning, she added extra physical training. Every evening, she studied field manuals that weren't required reading. Every spare moment, she worked to become better, stronger, more capable than anyone expected her to be. The truth was, she could have made things easier for herself. One word to her father, and everything would change. But Isabel had made a promise to herself before enlisting: she would succeed or fail on her own merits. Her father, Major General Robert Miller, commander of Fort Hastings and one of the most respected officers in the United States Army, didn't even know she was stationed at his base. She'd requested the assignment under her mother's maiden name, Novak, and had kept her real identity hidden from everyone. It was a deception that weighed on her conscience, but it was necessary. She'd seen too many military children ride their parents' coattails, earning ranks and respect they hadn't truly earned. Isabel refused to be one of them. If she was going to be a soldier, she would be a real one, tested and proven like everyone else. As she headed toward the barracks to shower before morning formation, Isabel passed a group of soldiers from her platoon. They were clustered around a bench, laughing at something on one of their phones. Staff Sergeant Dylan Harper, a 10-year veteran with a reputation for being both an excellent soldier and a relentless bully, looked up as she approached. Well, Harper said, his voice carrying across the quad. If it isn't little Novak, still trying to prove she belongs here. Isabel kept walking, her eyes fixed straight ahead. She'd learned early that engaging with Harper only gave him more ammunition. The sergeant had made her life difficult from day one, assigning her the worst duties, criticizing her performance even when it was flawless, and encouraging the other soldiers to exclude her from their informal gatherings. "I'm talking to you, Private," Harper called out, his tone sharpening. "It's disrespectful to ignore a superior officer." Isabel stopped and turned, keeping her face neutral. "I apologize, Staff Sergeant. I didn't realize you were addressing me directly." Harper stood and walked toward her, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. He was a big man, well over 6 feet tall, with the kind of build that came from years of military training. Standing in front of Isabel, who barely reached 5'4", he seemed to loom like a mountain. "You know what your problem is, Novak?" Harper said, circling around her like a predator sizing up prey. "You think if you work hard enough, do enough push-ups, stay late enough, that we'll forget you don't really belong here." "I belong here as much as anyone, Staff Sergeant," Isabel replied quietly. Her accent, usually faint, became more pronounced when she was nervous or angry. Right now, it was both. Harper laughed, and several of the soldiers watching joined in. "You belong here? You're a 100-pound girl with an accent who can barely lift a full pack. The only reason you made it through basic is because they lowered the standards." The accusation stung because Isabel had heard variations of it her entire military career. Never mind that she'd scored in the top 10% of her basic training class. Never mind that she could field strip a rifle faster than most of the men in her unit. Never mind that she'd memorized every regulation, every procedure, every protocol. To Harper and soldiers like him, she would always be inadequate simply because of her size and gender. "The standards weren't lowered for me, Staff Sergeant," Isabel said, fighting to keep her voice level. "I met every requirement, same as everyone else." "That's debatable," Harper replied. "But here's what's not debatable, I'm your superior officer, and when I give you an order, you follow it. Understood?" "Yes, Staff Sergeant." Harper smiled, and there was something cruel in it. He walked back to the bench where he'd been sitting and sat down, extending one boot toward Isabel. "Good. Then clean my boots, Private. And make them shine." The quad fell silent. The handful of soldiers who'd been watching the exchange suddenly found other places to look. This wasn't about cleanliness or military protocol. Harper's boots were already polished to a mirror shine. This was about humiliation, about putting Isabel in her place, about reminding her that no matter how hard she worked, she would always be beneath him. Isabel looked at the boot, then at Harper's face. She could refuse. Should refuse. This wasn't a lawful order, it was hazing, pure and simple. But refusing would give Harper exactly what he wanted, an excuse to write her up, to add another mark against her record, to build a case that she was insubordinate and unsuitable for military service. So instead, she knelt down in the dust and began cleaning boots that didn't need cleaning, while the man who would later learn exactly who she was sat back and enjoyed his petty victory. The mess hall buzzed with the usual morning chaos as Isabel sat alone at a corner table, methodically eating her breakfast. Her hands were still dirty from cleaning Harper's boots, the polish staining her fingernails despite her attempts to scrub them clean. She'd spent 20 minutes on her knees in front of him, working the cloth over leather that already gleamed, while he made jokes to his friends about finally finding something she's qualified for. The humiliation burned worse than any physical training ever had. But Isabel had learned long ago to compartmentalize pain, to file it away in some locked corner of her mind where it couldn't interfere with her performance. Her mother had taught her that, back when Isabel was 12 and struggling with the cruel taunts of middle school classmates who mocked her accent and her second-hand clothes. "Pain is information," her mother would say in her lilting Czech accent. "It tells you where you are wounded, but it does not tell you who you are. Only you decide that." Isabel was deciding now that Staff Sergeant Harper would not break her. She would endure whatever tests he threw at her, would meet every challenge with the same quiet determination that had carried her through basic training, through the doubts of her drill sergeants, through the loneliness of being perpetually on the outside looking in. "Mind if I sit?" Isabel looked up to find Private First Class Jenny Torres standing with a tray, her expression cautiously friendly. Torres was one of the other women in the company, a mechanic from San Antonio with 3 years of service under her belt. Unlike most of the other soldiers, she'd never gone out of her way to make Isabel feel unwelcome, but she'd never gone out of her way to be friendly either. "It's a free country," Isabel said, gesturing to the empty seats. Torres sat down, arranging her food with careful precision. For a moment, they ate in silence, and Isabel wondered what had prompted this unexpected companionship. In her experience, soldiers didn't associate with pariahs unless they wanted something. That was messed up, Torres finally said. What Harper did out there. Isabel shrugged, keeping her eyes on her plate. It's fine. It's not fine. It's hazing, and it's against regulations. Torres lowered her voice. You could report him, you know. Go to the captain or even the inspector general. And say what? Isabel asked. That a staff sergeant asked me to clean his boots? He'd say it was part of my training, that he was teaching me attention to detail. It would be my word against his, and we both know how that would end. Torres winced because they both knew Isabel was right. The military was changing, slowly becoming more inclusive, more aware of the problems of harassment and discrimination. But change happened in policy manuals faster than it happened in hearts and minds. On the ground level, in the daily reality of military life, the old hierarchies and prejudices still held power. I saw what you did this morning, Torres continued. The extra PT. You do that every day, don't you? Isabel nodded. Every morning. An extra studying at night. If I'm going to be here, I'm going to be the best soldier I can be. That's admirable, Torres said. But you know it won't change anything, right? Guys like Harper, they've already decided who you are. Nothing you do will make them see you differently. The words hit harder than Isabel expected because she'd been trying not to acknowledge that truth. She'd been telling herself that if she just worked hard enough, performed well enough, proved herself thoroughly enough, that respect would eventually follow. But 3 months at Fort Hastings had taught her that some people's minds were made up long before she ever arrived. Maybe not, Isabel said quietly. But I'll know. I'll know that I gave everything I had, that I didn't let their prejudices become my limitations. Torres studied her for a long moment, something like respect flickering in her eyes. You're tougher than you look, Novak. I'll give you that. Before Isabel could respond, the mess hall doors burst open and Captain Brennan strode in, his presence immediately commanding attention. He scanned the room until his eyes landed on Isabel's table, then made his way over with purposeful strides. Private Novak, he said, his tone clipped. You're being reassigned effective immediately. Isabel's heart sank. This was it. Harper had complained about her, or Brennan had finally decided she was more trouble than she was worth, and now she was being sent away. Probably to some administrative position where she could push papers and stay out of sight. Yes, sir, she said, standing at attention. May I ask where I'm being assigned? Division headquarters, Brennan replied. They need additional personnel for a special security detail. You've been selected to fill one of the positions. Isabel blinked, surprised. Division headquarters meant working in the same building as her father, increasing the risk that someone would recognize her or make the connection between Private Novak and General Miller. But it also meant a significant responsibility, a chance to prove herself in a more visible role. I understand, sir. When do I report? 1400 hours. Full dress uniform. You'll be briefed on your duties when you arrive. Brennan paused, his expression softening slightly. I know you've had a rough time in this company, Novak. Maybe this is a chance for a fresh start. After he left, Torres let out a low whistle. Division headquarters. That's a big deal. Security details are usually reserved for soldiers with more experience. Isabel sat back down, her mind racing. This could be an opportunity, a chance to escape Harper's constant harassment and prove herself in a new environment. But it could also be a disaster if her identity was discovered. Her father ran division headquarters. She'd be working in his world, surrounded by people who knew him, who might recognize the family resemblance or question why a brand new private was being assigned to such a prestigious detail. You okay? Torres asked. You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine, Isabel lied. Just surprised, that's all. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Isabel returned to the barracks, pressed her dress uniform until it was perfect, and tried not to think about the dozens of ways this new assignment could go wrong. She'd spent 3 months successfully hiding her connection to the base commander. Now she was being sent to work directly under his command, where that connection would be much harder to conceal. At 1,345 hours, Isabel stood outside the division headquarters building, staring up at its imposing facade. Somewhere inside, her father was working, making decisions that affected thousands of soldiers. And somewhere inside, she was about to begin a job that might finally force her to choose between the anonymity she'd carefully cultivated and the truth she'd been hiding. She thought about her mother's words again. Pain is information. It tells you where you are wounded, but it does not tell you who you are. Isabel straightened her shoulders, checked her uniform one final time, and walked through the doors into whatever came next. We've invested considerable effort in bringing you this story. If you find it engaging, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, let's return to the narrative. The security briefing room at division headquarters was smaller than Isabel expected, with white walls decorated only by a large photograph of the chain of command. Her father's official portrait hung in the center, his expression stern but not unkind. Isabel forced herself to look away, focusing instead on the lieutenant conducting the orientation. Security detail for division headquarters is a 24/7 operation, Lieutenant Warren explained to the 5 newly assigned soldiers. You'll work rotating shifts, 12 hours on, 12 off. Your primary responsibility is monitoring access points, verifying credentials, and maintaining a visible security presence. Isabel took notes, grateful for the straightforward nature of the assignment. It seemed like standard security work, nothing that would require extensive interaction with senior leadership. Maybe she could maintain her anonymity after all. Private Novak, Warren said, and Isabel's head snapped up. You'll be assigned to the executive corridor, 3rd floor. That's where the general and his senior staff maintain their offices. Of course. Of all the possible assignments, she'd been placed exactly where the risk of discovery was highest. Isabel kept her expression neutral. Yes, sir. Understood. The other soldiers, all men with at least 2 years of service, exchanged glances. One of them, a corporal named Anderson, spoke up. Sir, no disrespect, but shouldn't the executive corridor go to someone with more experience? Novak's fresh out of basic. Warren consulted his clipboard. The assignments come from the sergeant major's office. If you have concerns, take them up the chain of command. Otherwise, these are your posts. After the briefing, Isabel made her way to the 3rd floor, her stomach tight with anxiety. The executive corridor was quiet, carpeted in deep blue with polished wood doors bearing brass nameplates. At the far end, larger than the others, was her father's office. The nameplate read, Major General Robert Miller, Division Commander. Her post was at a security desk position to monitor the elevator and stairwell access. A more experienced guard, Sergeant First Class Raymond Turner, was waiting to train her. He was an older soldier, maybe 50, with graying hair and the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades in uniform. You're Novak? Turner asked, looking her up and down with undisguised skepticism. Yes, Sergeant. Well, this is usually a position for someone with a few years under their belt, but orders are orders. He gestured to the desk. You'll check every person who comes through, verify their ID against the access list, and log all visitors. The general doesn't like surprises, so if someone's not on the list, they don't pass without clearance. Clear? Crystal clear, Sergeant. Turner spent the next hour walking her through procedures, testing her on protocol, and making it obvious he doubted her ability to handle the responsibility. Isabel answered every question correctly, demonstrated every procedure flawlessly, and watched his skepticism slowly shift to grudging respect. You know your stuff, I'll give you that, Turner admitted. But knowing and doing are different things. This isn't some basic training exercise. These are flag officers and senior staff. You mess up here, and it reflects on the entire security detail. I understand, Sergeant. I won't mess up. We'll see. Turner checked his watch. Your shift starts in 10 minutes. I'll be around for the first few days, but after that, you're on your own." As Turner left to check on the other posts, Isabel settled into her chair and reviewed the access list. Her hands trembled slightly as she scanned the names, realizing that she was now responsible for controlling access to her father's office. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent months avoiding him, and now she was literally the gatekeeper to his world. The elevator chimed, and Isabel's first test arrived in the form of a colonel she didn't recognize. She stood, checking his ID against her list with professional efficiency. This was her job now, and she would do it perfectly, just like everything else. Even if it meant standing guard outside her father's door while pretending to be a stranger. The first week on the executive corridor passed without incident, and Isabel began to relax into the rhythm of her new assignment. She arrived 15 minutes early for every shift, maintained her post with meticulous attention to detail, and logged every visitor with careful precision. The work was monotonous compared to the physical demands of regular infantry duty, but it required a different kind of discipline, constant alertness without constant action. Sergeant Turner's skepticism gradually faded as Isabel proved herself reliable and competent. By the fourth day, he'd stopped hovering over her shoulder and started treating her like a regular member of the security team. It was a small victory, but Isabel had learned to appreciate small victories. The challenge came from an unexpected direction. On Thursday afternoon, as Isabel was logging a civilian contractor's departure, Staff Sergeant Dylan Harper stepped off the elevator. Her stomach dropped. What was he doing at division headquarters? Harper's surprise quickly transformed into that familiar cruel smile. Well, little Novak, playing soldier in the big leagues now. He approached her desk without showing identification. Staff Sergeant, I need to see your ID and verify your appointment, Isabel said, keeping her voice professional. You need to see my ID? Harper laughed. I'm your superior officer, Private. I don't need to show you anything. Division headquarters protocol requires all personnel, regardless of rank, to present valid identification and state their business, Isabel replied, her heart pounding. I'm just following orders, Staff Sergeant. Harper's expression darkened. You're getting awful bold for someone who was cleaning my boots last week. Maybe that new assignment has gone to your head. I'm simply doing my job, Staff Sergeant. ID and purpose of visit, please. For a tense moment, Harper stared at her, clearly debating whether to escalate the confrontation. Finally, with exaggerated slowness, he pulled out his military ID and slapped it on her desk. I'm here to deliver a report to the operations section. Satisfied? Isabel checked his credentials and logged his information. Operations is on the second floor, Staff Sergeant. You'll need to take the elevator down one level. I know where operations is, Harper snapped. But he'd been forced to follow protocol, forced to treat her not as a target for his bullying but as a soldier with legitimate authority. As he walked back to the elevator, Isabel allowed herself the smallest smile of satisfaction. That evening, during shift change, Sergeant Turner pulled her aside. Heard you had a run-in with a staff sergeant from 3rd Infantry this afternoon. Isabel's stomach tightened. Had Harper filed a complaint? I enforced access protocol, Sergeant. Is there a problem? Problem? No. Turner actually smiled. Corporal Davis from the 2nd floor said you handled it perfectly. That particular staff sergeant has a reputation for thinking rules don't apply to him. Good to see someone hold the line. The validation felt better than Isabel wanted to admit. For months, she'd endured Harper's harassment with quiet resilience, never pushing back, never challenging his authority. Today, protected by protocol and her legitimate role, she'd finally been able to treat him exactly as he deserved, like everyone else. But her relief was short-lived. On Friday afternoon, her father emerged from his office for the first time during her shift. Isabel had seen him arrive each morning and depart each evening, but always from a distance, always with enough warning to compose herself. Now he was walking directly toward her desk, and she had nowhere to hide. Major General Miller was 53 years old, tall and fit despite the desk job, with iron gray hair and the same blue eyes Isabel saw in her own mirror every morning. He carried himself with the natural authority of someone who'd spent 30 years leading soldiers. "Good afternoon, Private," he said, his voice exactly as Isabel remembered from family dinners that felt like a lifetime ago. "Good afternoon, sir." Isabel stood at attention, grateful that military protocol gave her an excuse to avoid extended eye contact. "You're new to this post, aren't you? I haven't seen you here before." "Yes, sir. This is my first week." He studied her for a moment, and Isabel's heart hammered against her ribs. Did he recognize her? They hadn't seen each other in 6 months, since before she'd left for basic training. She'd lost weight, cut her long hair to regulation length, and changed in dozens of small ways that military life demanded. "You're doing a good job," he finally said. "Sergeant Turner speaks highly of your attention to detail." "Thank you, sir." He nodded and continued down the corridor, leaving Isabel trembling at her post. That had been too close. She couldn't keep working directly outside his office without eventually being discovered. But requesting a transfer would raise questions she couldn't answer. She was trapped by her own deception, caught between the anonymity she needed and the proximity she couldn't avoid. As her shift ended and she headed back to the barracks, Isabel wondered how much longer she could maintain this impossible balance. The following Tuesday brought the kind of crisp autumn weather that made military life almost pleasant. Isabel arrived at division headquarters at 0545, giving herself extra time to review the day's access list and prepare for what promised to be a busy shift. A visiting delegation from the Pentagon was scheduled to meet with her father and his staff, which meant increased security protocols and heightened attention from senior leadership. Sergeant Turner briefed her during the morning handover. "Everything by the book today, Novak. The brass will be watching, so double-check every ID, even if you recognize the person. Especially if you recognize the person." "Understood, Sergeant." The morning proceeded smoothly. Isabel checked credentials, logged visitors, and maintained the professional demeanor that had become second nature. She was beginning to feel like she belonged here, like she'd earned this position through competence rather than coincidence. It was a dangerous feeling, she knew. Comfort led to complacency, and complacency led to mistakes. At 1030 hours, Staff Sergeant Harper stepped off the elevator again. This time, he wasn't alone. 3 other soldiers from 3rd Infantry accompanied him, all carrying boxes that presumably contained documents or equipment. "Access list, Novak," Harper said, not bothering with pleasantries. "We're delivering updated training materials to the operations section." Isabel checked her list. Harper was on it, but only Harper. "Staff Sergeant, I have you authorized, but not your companions. I'll need to verify their access before they can proceed." "They're with me," Harper said, his tone suggesting that should be sufficient. "I understand, Staff Sergeant, but protocol requires individual verification for all personnel entering the executive corridor, regardless of who they're accompanying." One of the soldiers with Harper, a private first class named Brooks, spoke up. "Come on, this is ridiculous. We're just delivering boxes. We'll be here 5 minutes." "Protocol is protocol," Isabel replied, already reaching for the phone to call the operations section and verify the delivery. "It'll just take a moment to confirm." Harper's face reddened. "You know what your problem is, Novak? You hide behind protocol because you're afraid to make a decision. Real soldiers use judgment, not just rule books." Isabel finished her call, learning that operations was indeed expecting a delivery but hadn't provided the names of additional personnel. She explained the situation to the staff duty officer, received verbal authorization for the 3 soldiers, and logged them all in with careful notation of the special clearance. "You're all cleared," she told Harper. "Operations section is expecting you." As the group moved past her desk, Harper leaned in close enough that only Isabel could hear. "Enjoy your time playing important, Private. Because I guarantee you won't last here. Someone's going to figure out you don't belong, and then you'll be right back where you started, cleaning boots and counting equipment." Isabel didn't respond, didn't react, didn't give him the satisfaction of knowing his words had landed. But they had. Because Harper was right about one thing, she didn't belong here, not really. She was living a lie, pretending to be someone she wasn't, using a false name to avoid the advantages and disadvantages that came with being the general's daughter. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Her father's executive officer, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, emerged from the general's office and approached Isabel's desk with a folder in hand. "Private Novak, the general would like to see you." Isabel's blood turned to ice. "Ma'am? The general wants to speak with you. Now, please." This was it. Somehow, he'd figured it out. Maybe someone had run a background check. Maybe he'd finally recognized her. Maybe the entire careful deception she'd constructed was about to collapse around her. Isabel followed Lieutenant Colonel Hayes down the corridor, her mind racing through possible explanations, excuses, justifications. But when she entered her father's office, his expression wasn't one of recognition or anger. It was something else entirely, concern. "Private Novak," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Please, sit down." Isabel sat, maintaining perfect military bearing despite the terror flooding through her system. "I've received a concerning report," her father continued, "about an incident involving you and Staff Sergeant Harper from 3rd Infantry. According to Sergeant Turner, this isn't the first time Harper has shown you disrespect." Relief and confusion warred in Isabel's chest. This wasn't about her identity. This was about Harper's harassment. "Sir, I can handle Staff Sergeant Harper." "There's no need for." "There's every need," her father interrupted gently. "I don't tolerate harassment of any kind in my command, Private. Sergeant Turner's report suggests a pattern of behavior that violates both regulation and basic human decency." He paused, studying her with those familiar blue eyes. "Why didn't you report this yourself?" Isabel chose her words carefully. "Sir, with respect, I'm trying to prove myself as a soldier. Filing complaints would make me look weak. Standing up for yourself isn't weakness, Private. It's strength." "Yes, sir." Isabel swallowed hard, fighting the urge to break protocol and speak to him not as a general but as her father. "Permission to speak freely, sir." "Granted. I don't want special treatment. I don't want to be the soldier who runs to leadership every time someone's mean to me. I want to earn respect through my performance, not through complaints." Her father leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You remind me of someone I know. Stubborn. Principled. Too proud for her own good." Isabel's heart stopped. Did he know? "My daughter," he continued, "is somewhere in the army right now, probably dealing with the same kind of nonsense you are. I hope she has the sense to report it when it crosses the line." He fixed Isabel with a serious look. "Staff Sergeant Harper will be counseled. If he retaliates in any way, you report it immediately. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir." As Isabel left his office, her hands were shaking. He didn't know. But he protected her anyway, the same way he'd protect any soldier under his command facing harassment. It was exactly the kind of leader he'd always been, and exactly why she was so determined to earn her place without using his name. Word of Staff Sergeant Harper's counseling spread through the base faster than Isabel could have imagined. By the next morning, soldiers from 3rd Infantry who'd never spoken to her before were nodding respectfully as they passed. The dynamic had shifted, and not necessarily in the way Isabel had hoped. "I heard the general himself intervened," Private Torres said during lunch, her voice carrying a mix of admiration and curiosity. "That's a pretty big deal for a private who's been here less than 4 months." Isabel picked at her food, uncomfortable with the attention. "Sergeant Turner made the report, not me. I didn't ask for any intervention. Still, having the division commander in your corner? That's serious protection." Torres leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Some people are saying you must have connections. Family or something." Isabel's stomach tightened. This was exactly what she'd been trying to avoid. "I don't have connections. I have a sergeant who follows protocol when he sees harassment. That's all. But the whispers had started, quiet speculation about why a brand new private had been assigned to the prestigious executive corridor post, why the general had personally addressed her harassment complaint, why she seemed to receive opportunities that others didn't. The irony was bitter. Isabel had spent months enduring Harper's bullying to avoid appearing privileged, and now his downfall was creating exactly the perception she'd been trying to prevent. The situation escalated on Thursday when Isabel reported for her shift to find Corporal Anderson, one of the soldiers from her initial security briefing, waiting at her post. His expression was hostile, his body language aggressive. "We need to talk, Novak," Anderson said, blocking her path to the desk. "About what, Corporal?" "About how a private with 3 months of service ends up with a cushy headquarters job while soldiers with actual experience get stuck in the field. About how that same private gets special protection from the division commander when someone hurts her feelings." Isabel forced herself to remain calm. "I didn't ask for this assignment, and I didn't ask for anyone's protection. I'm just doing my job." "Right. And it's just coincidence that you're cozy with the general? That he takes personal interest in your welfare?" Anderson stepped closer, his voice dropping to an angry whisper. "I've been in this army for 6 years, Novak. I've deployed twice, earned my stripes through actual combat experience. And I'm still a corporal while you're getting fast-tracked because of who you know." "I don't know anyone," Isabel said, but the lie tasted sour in her mouth. "Then explain it. Explain how you got here. Explain why the general cares about some nobody private." Isabel couldn't explain it, not without revealing the truth. And in that moment, she realized the impossible position she'd created for herself. Every protection, every opportunity, every small success would be viewed through the lens of suspected nepotism. She couldn't prove she'd earned her place without admitting she was the general's daughter, but admitting it would confirm everyone's worst assumptions. "I can't explain it in a way that will satisfy you, Corporal," Isabel finally said. "All I can do is continue performing my duties to the best of my ability and hope that eventually, my work speaks for itself." Anderson shook his head in disgust. "Your work?" "Right. Let me know how that works out for you, Princess." The nickname stung worse than any of Harper's insults because it was closer to the truth than Anderson could possibly know. Isabel was a princess of sorts, protected by a title she'd never claimed but couldn't escape. That evening, Isabel sat in her barracks room and wrote a letter she knew she'd never send. It was addressed to her father, explaining everything: her decision to enlist under a false name, her determination to succeed on her own merits, her growing realization that true independence might be impossible when your father commands the very base where you serve. She wrote about Harper's harassment and Anderson's accusations, about the impossible choice between accepting help and proving herself, about the loneliness of maintaining a deception that separated her from both her family and her fellow soldiers. When she finished, Isabel read the letter 3 times, then carefully tore it into pieces and threw it away. Some truths were better left unwritten, some confessions better left unspoken. She'd made her choice when she enlisted under her mother's name, and now she had to live with the consequences. The question was, how much longer could she maintain this impossible balance before everything collapsed? The dawn broke cold and gray over Fort Hastings as Isabel stood at attention in her father's office, flanked by Lieutenant Colonel Hayes and Sergeant Major Chen. The emergency meeting had been called at 0600, before the regular staff arrived, and the gravity in her father's expression told Isabel that something significant was about to happen. "Private Miller," her father said, using her real name for the first time in an official capacity. "We need to address the situation that occurred last night." Isabel had spent the hours since the rescue replaying every moment, wondering if she'd made the right choices, if she should have waited for authorization, if her actions had compromised her father's position. "Sir, I take full responsibility for my decisions. I understand there will be consequences." "Consequences?" Her father's expression softened slightly. "Isabel, you saved 3 lives last night. The investigation team confirmed that without immediate intervention, all 3 soldiers would have died from smoke inhalation or structural collapse before fire and rescue could establish a safe entry point." "But I violated protocol," Isabel insisted. I entered a hazardous area without authorization, used equipment I wasn't technically certified for, and made command decisions above my pay grade. Yes, you did all of those things, Sergeant Major Chin interjected. And in doing so, you demonstrated exactly the kind of initiative and courage the Army needs. The kind we've been trying to cultivate in you all along. Isabel looked between the three senior leaders, confusion evident on her face. I don't understand. Her father stood and walked around his desk, his posture shifting from commanding officer to something more personal. Isabel, when you first arrived at Fort Hastings under your mother's name, I knew within 48 hours. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize my own daughter? The revelation hit Isabel like a physical blow. You knew? This whole time, you knew? Security protocols flag any soldier with connections to senior leadership, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes explained. The moment you arrived, your file was brought to the general's attention. He made the decision to allow you to maintain your anonymity. But why? Isabel's mind raced, recalculating months of experiences through this new lens. Why let me struggle? Why not just tell me you knew? Her father's expression grew serious. Because you needed to prove something to yourself, Isabel. You needed to know that you could succeed on your own merits, without the advantages or disadvantages of being the commander's daughter. And you needed to learn that sometimes, accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The assignment to division headquarters, Isabel said slowly, pieces falling into place. Harper's counseling. These weren't coincidences. The assignment was legitimate, we needed additional security personnel, her father replied. But yes, I also wanted you close enough that I could ensure you were being treated fairly without directly interfering in your chain of command. As for Harper, his behavior violated regulations regardless of who you were. Sergeant Turner's report simply gave me the justification to address a problem I had been monitoring. Isabel felt something between betrayal and relief. So none of it was real? None of my achievements actually mattered because you were manipulating everything behind the scenes? That's not true, Sergeant Major Chin said firmly. Your performance evaluations, your test scores, your successful completion of every assigned task, those were entirely your own achievements. The general didn't make you work harder than everyone else. He didn't study those field manuals for you or complete that obstacle course record for you. He simply ensured that your hard work was evaluated fairly. Last night proved something crucial, her father continued. When faced with a genuine emergency, you didn't hesitate. You didn't wait for permission or worry about consequences. You saw soldiers in danger and you acted. That's not something that can be taught or manipulated. That's who you are as a soldier. Isabel struggled to process this new reality. Months of carefully maintained deception, of proving herself against what she'd thought were impossible odds, now revealed as a different kind of test entirely. What happens now? Now you have a choice to make, her father said. You can continue serving under your mother's name, maintaining your separation from my command. Or you can acknowledge your identity and accept the opportunities and challenges that come with it. Either way, you'll be recommended for promotion to specialist and formal recognition for your actions last night. And if I choose to maintain my anonymity, then you'll be transferred to another installation where you can continue building your career without the complication of serving under your father's command. It's your choice, Isabel. It always has been. Isabel looked at the three leaders who'd shaped her military experience in ways she was only beginning to understand. She thought about Private Brooks and the other soldiers she'd pulled from the fire, about the respect she'd seen in their eyes afterward, about the person she'd become through months of struggle and perseverance. I need time to think about it, she finally said. Her father nodded. Take all the time you need. You've earned that much. 3 weeks later, Isabel stood in formation on the main parade ground at Fort Hastings, the autumn sun warm on her face. Her uniform bore the new rank of specialist, the result of an accelerated promotion that had been processed through official channels and approved by a review board that included officers from outside her father's command. The ceremony was smaller than some, just her company and a handful of senior leaders, but it felt significant in ways that transcended the size of the audience. Isabel had made her decision, and today marked the beginning of a new chapter. Specialist Isabel Miller, the adjutant called, and Isabel stepped forward, using her real name publicly for the first time since arriving at Fort Hastings. Her father stood at the center of the platform, his expression professionally neutral but his eyes carrying a warmth that Isabel had missed during their months of carefully maintained distance. He held the Army Achievement Medal, the citation already read aloud, detailing her actions during the barracks fire rescue. Specialist Miller, he said formally, for conspicuous bravery and initiative in the face of extreme danger, demonstrating the highest standards of military service, it is my honor to present you with this award. As he pinned the medal to her uniform, he spoke quietly, words meant only for her. Your mother would be so proud. I know I am. Isabel's eyes stung with unexpected tears. Her mother, who'd passed away 2 years before Isabel enlisted, had been her greatest champion and fiercest advocate. Everything Isabel had accomplished, every challenge she'd overcome, had been driven partly by the desire to honor the woman who'd taught her that strength came in many forms. The ceremony concluded, and Isabel's company was dismissed. Soldiers who'd once questioned her presence now offered genuine congratulations. Private Torres embraced her with uncharacteristic emotion. Even Corporal Anderson approached with grudging respect, acknowledging that he'd misjudged her. Staff Sergeant Harper was notably absent, having been reassigned to a different installation following additional investigations into his pattern of harassment toward junior soldiers. His transfer had been processed through official channels, with no direct intervention from the general, but the message had been clear: the Army had no place for leaders who built themselves up by tearing others down. As the crowd dispersed, Isabel found herself alone with her father on the parade ground, the autumn wind carrying the scent of fallen leaves and possibility. So, he said, dropping the formal tone now that they were alone. You've decided to stay at Fort Hastings. To serve openly as my daughter. I have, Isabel confirmed. I realized that running from my identity wasn't strength, it was fear. Real courage means accepting who I am, family connections and all, and proving myself anyway. It won't be easy, her father warned. Some will always assume you receive special treatment. Others will hold you to impossible standards to prove you're not receiving special treatment. You'll be scrutinized more closely than other soldiers. I know. But I'm ready for it. These past months taught me that I don't need to hide who I am to prove my worth. My achievements speak for themselves, whether my name is Novak or Miller. Her father smiled, genuine pride evident in his expression. You've grown, Isabel. Not just as a soldier, but as a person. That's what I hoped would happen when I let you maintain your cover. You needed to discover your own strength, your own capabilities, without the shadow of my rank influencing every interaction. Did you ever doubt I'd succeed? Isabel asked. Never. I've known since you were 8 years old and insisted on climbing that tree everyone said was too tall for you that you had something special. A determination that couldn't be taught or inherited, only cultivated through challenge and perseverance. They walked together across the parade ground, father and daughter, general and specialist, 2 soldiers sharing the same commitment to service despite the complexities of their relationship. There's one more thing, her father said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. A letter of recommendation for officer candidate school. You have the leadership qualities, the tactical knowledge, and the proven courage necessary to become an officer. When you're ready, the opportunity is there. Isabel took the envelope, feeling its weight both literal and symbolic. Officer candidate school would mean new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, new ways to serve beyond the expectations others placed on her. Thank you, she said simply. For everything. For knowing when to step back, for knowing when to intervene, for trusting me to find my own path. That's what fathers do, he replied. And that's what commanders do. The trick is knowing which role to play when. As they parted ways, her father returning to division headquarters, Isabel heading back to her unit, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd enlisted seeking to escape her father's shadow, believing that anonymity was the only path to authenticity. But she'd learned that true strength wasn't about hiding who you were. It was about embracing every part of yourself, your advantages and disadvantages, your connections and your independence, your heritage and your achievements, and forging them into something uniquely your own. Isabel Miller was the general's daughter. She was also a soldier who'd earned her rank, saved lives, and proven that determination mattered more than size, gender, or family name. Both truths could coexist. Both truths defined who she was. And both truths would shape the soldier she would continue to become. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.